powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, this is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher's in the house for a Mosher Monday as we get ready for Eagles training camp just 3 weeks away from tomorrow, really 2 weeks away. 2 Tuesdays after tomorrow is all we have to wait, and we'll be back with the Birds. But we're with the Birds every single day during Football at 4, and Geoff Mosher is here as we got a lot to talk about. The Cowboys, of course, many people talking about has the gap closed between Philadelphia and Dallas. And over at InsideTheBirds.com, the guys have a series and taking a look at how they match up with this Cowboys team, Geoff. And a lot of people have asked the question, did the Cowboys win the offseason? Have they closed the gap on the Eagles? Have they done enough this offseason? How do we look at this Dallas team and kind of how they match up with this Philadelphia team?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's what we really sought to answer, Mike, as far as closing the gap. And remember, the Cowboys won 12 games last year, so they were a pretty good 53 to begin with. They just had some deficiencies that held them back, especially in the playoffs and just when they were trying to win better games throughout the course of the year. One thing that was glaringly poor about them on offense was that Dak Prescott threw a ton of interceptions last year. I think he led the league in interceptions, but that's never really been his forte. In fact, he threw 15 interceptions last year, and he was one of the least intercepted quarterbacks by interception rate going into the season. So that was a little bit of an anomaly that you point to what they had around him from a playmaker standpoint. Michael Gallup was their explosive receiver. He was coming back from ACL surgery. He clearly wasn't that guy. And there were times where they had to throw the ball 35, 40 times, which is not what they ever want to do. And that produced what you saw. Now you add Brandon Cooks, who no matter what you say about the guy, puts up 1,000 yards every year. And he's certainly a good receiver in this league, an explosive receiver. You pair that with CeeDee Lamb, who's really had a great year last year. And then Michael Gallup back, a full year now after the ACL reconstruction. I think logic would stand to reason that if they're healthy and the offensive line stays healthy, which has been an issue for them, but that's a better offensive kind of makeup than what they had last year, especially now with Tony Pollard moving into that top back role. And I'm sure they will add another number 2 complimentary guy to Pollard before the start of the season.
Do you look at it as this offense is very predicated on what Prescott does? I mean, we know there's a new play caller. The head coach is going to now call plays, Mike McCarthy. I look at this offense and wonder how different they're going to look now because Zeke Elliott's not there. So to you, is Prescott the most important? The quarterback generally is. You know what I'm saying? Like the fact that Elliott's not there anymore, how much does that change their offense?
Yeah, it's not just about Dak, even though it's always about the quarterback. It's sort of about what are they going to be conceptually now, right? Without Zeke Elliott, who they always felt kind of forced to have to force feed because of his contract. And then what are they also going to look like without Kellen
Moore?
Clemens? No, I'm sorry, Kellen Moore. Yeah, I always get those two guys mixed up. Kellen Moore, who's now with the Chargers offensive coordinator. So they brought in Brian Schottenheimer. Mike McCarthy is going to be the play caller. And so that signals to me, without them coming out and saying it, that they're going to run a more traditional, more conventional West Coast offense, and that they're going to look to run the ball more. And not just because they're going to run a West Coast offense and Schottenheimer's here, but they draft a guy out of Michigan in the second round, the tight end Luke Schoonmaker, who is a good blocker, a very good blocker. And, Mike, I'm inclined to think that they actually saw on tape a guy who they think can catch the ball much better than the college stats suggest, because Michigan just doesn't throw the ball to the tight end. They didn't need to. That's not the kind of offense they ran. But for them to have taken him in the second round, they must have felt that he could be a more complete tight end at the pro level than he probably had to be at the college level. But regardless, the fact that he can block is another, and they're going to play him, is another signal perhaps that with this new West Coast, or with this conventional West Coast offense, they're probably going to run some 12 personnel too, and try to run the ball down some throats, because now you've got Ferguson and Luke Schoonmaker on the field at times, and you're probably trying to ease up on your top three receivers. Your offensive line has had some injuries in the past, so if you're trying to fortify that kind of run game, that's the perfect guy to do it with.
Yeah, I'm interested too. Cooks is added to the offense. You got obviously CeeDee Lamb there. Is their offense, in your opinion, it's interesting mix because they lose Moore, who was a good offensive coordinator, explosive, but they seem like, for whatever reason, the offense just wasn't what it should be. But you've got McCarthy, who's known more for being conservative, but it seems with Pollard and CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks that they should be more explosive, but will they be?
It's funny. It's a good question. There were times last year they were extraordinarily explosive. They scored 54 points against the Colts, 49 against the Bears. They had 40 against the Eagles, as we know. They had 40 against the Vikings. So there were those games where they really showed that they could do a lot with the ball. And Pollard's an explosive player. CeeDee Lamb's an explosive player. We know that Brandon Cooks again can put up 1,000 yards on you. And if Gallup returns to what he was prior to the ACL injury, that's pretty good too. But you're right. You also look at games last year where they had 3 against Tampa and 6 against Washington and 12 against San Francisco, 17 against the Eagles in the first game, albeit that was Cooper Rush starting. So they were just either feast or famine, it felt at times. I believe that if they're healthier this year, Mike, on the offensive line and in the wide receiver group, then they'll probably be more prolific from start to finish.
Yeah, it's going to be – I've always said the last couple of years, I like this Dallas team, but I think the fact that they should have been featuring Pollard more than Elliott held them back. You mentioned it, though. They had times where they were really explosive. The one year when Dak got hurt, they were like one of the most explosive offenses in the league, and then he got hurt. Defensively, they were a disaster. So where are they defensively now?
Well, defensively, I think they're a very good team. They were last year. We saw that when Dak got hurt and he missed 5 games. I think they went 4-1, right? They were 4-0, and then they lost to the Eagles. And that game, the Eagles got up big, and then Dallas started to come back. Even that game was not a high-scoring game, 26-17. That's a lot, but their defense is pretty good from top to bottom. And their biggest deficiency last year was that number 2 corner that they would play opposite Trayvon Diggs, right? It was Jordan Lewis. It was Anthony Brown. It was, Kelvin Joseph. Well, now they bring in Stephon Gilmore. And you can say what you want about him being a little bit over the hill and not the guy who was the defensive player of the year, about 3 or 4 years ago for the Patriots. But there's no question he's an upgrade over what they were playing at that number 2 corner spot over the last 2 years. And then they had a kid emerge last year as a nickel corner named Deron Bland, had an interception against Gardner Minshew and the Eagles last year in the game they won, who I think is going to win that nickel job. And in general, they're a team that plays a lot of big nickel because they have excellent safeties. They have Donovan Wilson, they have Malik Hooker, and they have Jaron Kearse, who's their third safety, but he's a good safety.
Yeah.
He can do a lot of different things. He can match up against tight ends. He can play in the box. So their base defense, Mike, is a big nickel. And we'll see if that continues because they've always been a little shaky at linebacker over the last few years with Leighton Vander Esch and then, obviously Jalen Smith came back to earth quickly and got released. So they're not great at coverage linebacker, but with that pass rush they got, Micah Parsons, they've got Tank, on the other side, and they've got Mozzie Smith now, and Odigizua is a good interior lineman. They've got some guys who can rush the passer, and Parsons alone. So I think the defense got better, and it was already their strong point.
Well, I would ask this question. Philadelphia, obviously 14 games. Dallas, 12. But Dallas has won more games the last 2 seasons. Who has less questions entering the season, Philly or Dallas?
I think Dallas has less questions on defense than Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia has less questions on offense. And then I would say overall, because of the coaching staff, although there's been some coaching staff movement here with the Eagles, I think that there's it's just a bigger question mark is Mike McCarthy really the right guy for the Cowboys? Because, you can say Kellen Moore might have been an issue for them. I don't know. There were some times where I thought the Dallas offense, like you were saying a couple of years ago, was really, really good. and there was a lot of movement in it, and now they're going to be more conventional. So I think overall the bigger questions are for Dallas. Did they do enough to overtake the Eagles as the best team in the division?
All right, Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. Yeah, you guys wrote about it. Same old Cowboys. I don't know. Are they better? They won 12 games. Is this a better Cowboys team in your mind than last year's team?
Yeah, see, that's why the headline is a question mark. We're asking. We're not saying. We're asking, will this be the same old Cowboys in that a team that looks really good on paper, a team that has, components to make a playoff run, but the same team that at the end of the year you're kind of scratching your head saying, that's it? That's all you had in you in the playoffs. 2 years ago you lose to what was it? The 49ers, and then last year they lose to, I forget who they lost to in the playoffs already. But that's the point, is that they never seem to be able to make, no matter what they do, that deep playoff run. So this is the year, is this going to be that year? Oh, yeah, last year they lost to the 49ers again. Yeah. So can they get over that hump? They certainly made the moves to try to be able to do so. But, we used to say this about the Eagles, right? Until they won the Super Bowl. You can make all the moves that you want. Until you finally do it, no, you don't get the benefit of the doubt.
That's true. I mean, I've been roped in on the Cowboys for the last 5 or 6 years. I kept saying, that they're the best team. They have the most talent. I do Find Five, Ugly Five. They're always in my Find Five. And at the end of the year, I end up with egg on my face saying I support the Cowboys, and they keep making me look bad. But I constantly feel like they've been the more talented team. And in years past, during the Garrett years, I would say, their coaching let them down. And even in the last couple of years, why has this team come up short? What has it been about them that they haven't been able to get over that hump?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if you look at their last 2 playoff games, you would probably say, you scored – well, I mean, they beat Tampa. The last 2 playoff losses, right? So they lost 19-12 to the 49ers. That means they played pretty good defense, but they did not score – nearly enough points to win a playoff game. And then the year before, when they lost to the 49ers, they lost 23-17. So there's your answer. They've scored 29 total points in their last 2 playoff losses. So the questions are on offense. Like I said, the Eagles have a lot fewer questions on offense than Dallas does, and you'll have to see if the new change in coordinator, the change in play caller, and the switch to Tony Pollard as the main back, and the addition of Brandon Cooks, is that going to finally be enough to get this team over the hump? I think everybody knows if that offensive line stays healthy, they probably score more points in general. They've not kept their offensive line healthy, specifically Tyron Smith. Terrence Steele is a good right tackle, but he's coming back from, I think, ACL surgery. So they got question marks there, and that's why we say same old Cowboys question mark.
Friday, when you were here, we asked the most significant free agent on the offensive side of the ball, and you and Andrew do a series over at InsideTheBirds.com. You both went with Zacchaeus, the new slot receiver there. Andrew says Nick Morrow is the defensive player who will have the most impact, the free agent addition. Who was your guy?
Yeah, it's funny. My guy was Terrell Edmonds. And the funny thing is, both of these guys, we're talking about the key defensive free agent signing, right? Both these guys signed 1-year deals. Morrow doesn't even get any guaranteed money. So the headline on the InsideTheBirds.com story, I think, was called steady, if unspectacular, meaning these guys are being asked to play some prominent roles, but don't expect Hassan Reddick, free agent contributions here. These guys are just hoping to be able to keep their jobs going, into the season and then throughout the season, because these are 2 fluid positions for the Eagles, safety and linebacker.
Yeah, Nick Morrow, I think you've chronicled a bunch, has no guaranteed money. He's not even a lock to make this team. Would you be surprised, though, if he didn't?
I would be surprised only because, who's taking his job? I mean, even if Christian Ellis winds up having a great camp and being the guy to start opposite Nakobe Dean, who's the number 3 linebacker? Sean Bradley, Ben Van Sumeren? Sometimes I feel like we're talking about 1980s WWF wrestlers here. We just throw out names. Iron Mike Sharp, who's taking his job.
Nice. Good one. Iron Mike Sharp. Maybe the Brooklyn Brawler is going to be coming in there and making a couple tackles. So we went over the most impactful rookie, second-year impact, breakout performer, offensive free agent edition, defensive free agent edition. What is the strongest position on offense for this Eagles team? That's interesting because your answer and my answer match. So does Andrew, because I think that this is the star of the team, and it goes unnoticed.
It does go unnoticed a little bit, because it's not a pomp and circumstance position. But I mean, on the Eagles, it kind of is. And I think fans know that everything begins with the offensive line, and in order for guys like Jalen Hurts and guys like Brown and Smith and the running backs to flourish, it's got to start with keeping that offensive line intact and healthy, because when they are amazing. I mean, you got three Pro Bowlers, and 2 All-Pros, 2 guys who are arguable. I don't even think it's arguable. 2 guys who are the number 1 player at their position in Jason Kelce and Lane Johnson. So it's really special what they put together on the offensive line. And even though you can say the combination of Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown last year combined for the second most receiving yards behind Waddle and Tyreek Hill, but had more touchdowns than Waddle and Hill. So you could say, hey, that's as good of a group right there as what anybody else has. And you can look at Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift and say, these 2 guys, when healthy, would be a number 1 running back for any other team in the league. But it is about the offensive line. There's no question about it.
I go back to, I'm not sure. And look, A.J. Brown's an unbelievable talent. Devonta Smith's unbelievable talent. I think Hurts is really taking an unbelievable step. But I don't know that Hurts takes the step without this offensive line. I mean, this line, the year before, when we all thought Hurts was just an average player, that line got them to the playoffs.
Yeah, and don't forget the sort of unmentioned a lot X factor, and this takes nothing away from Jalen Hurts, but Jason Kelce has more autonomy at center than most quarterbacks. A lot of, veteran quarterbacks like to be the one to make the call. They like to steer the traffic. You remember you'd see Peyton Manning yelling out, Omaha, Eli, Omaha. Once you reach a certain status, Aaron Rodgers, you're usually the one who's making a lot of the calls and the checks because you're the quarterback. You know what you want. Jason Kelce is the guy that does that for this team. He calls out the blitzes. He calls out the slide protections. He calls out any changes that are going to happen up front, and then the offense goes from there. So that's a whole lot of autonomy and a lot going through a guy's brain milliseconds before he snaps the ball and then milliseconds after he snaps the ball, which is occasionally why you see the snaps go over Jalen Hurts' head. There's a lot of digestion and processing going on in Jason Kelce's head, but not everybody can handle that.
Yeah, I know this is, we keep asking year after year, but do you think this is the last year for Jason Kelce?
I do. Something tells me that this is it for Jason Kelce.
All right. Well, we'll see how that plays out because obviously they have already drafted his replacement. Now, that would be another spot that we're going to be taking a look at here as camp goes. What will happen with his replacement, where we think Cam Jurgens, will he be the right guard? That's something we'll keep an eye on as well. Camp opens on July 25th. Today, July 10th. That means after tomorrow, only 2 Tuesdays remain before the grind begins. Geoff Mosher, InsideTheBirds.com and the Inside the Birds podcast here on Football at 4. All right, Moshe, thanks, buddy.
All right, remember, the grind never stops at Inside the Birds, Mike.
That's true. The podcast rolls on all off-season long, and so does Football at 4. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN.